So I have the pleasure of hosting Tara from Pittsburgh, and she'll tell us in a second what she actually does. I'm based in Tel Aviv. It's scorchingly hot, getting a little humid as we roll into July, August, summer here, which is not pleasant in the Middle East, but it is what it is. And Tara, welcome to the show. We'll start with the first question, which is your own personal journey to what you're doing right now.
Great, thanks for having me.
So, how did you end up doing, consulting like this?
So I started out initially working for the US government. I worked as an analyst at the FBI, and really loved that time of my career. I then moved into what I would consider to be core consulting, meaning learning people process, organizational design, and transformation consulting, but still in the government sector. And basically, after a few years of doing that work, I had always wanted to go into medicine as a career, and so that part of my journey that I hadn't yet really explored just kept coming to the forefront of my mind. And so I had an opportunity to work for a boutique firm in the life sciences, doing pharmacovigilance consulting, and so that got me very close to R&D, to clinical,
Right.
and from there, the current journey really took off. I've spent time in AI and the life sciences, a little bit of launch and market access, but mostly, R&D and clinical and AI. And that's really what I've been working on, for the past, decade plus. And that's really
Amazing.
how I got to be where I am today.
And that's amazing because your trajectory is kind of like just the industry trajectory, your personal trajectory.
Mhm.
So you're working today with companies helping them on with pharma. You're working with it says I think somewhere I read that 20 of the top pharma companies are your clients.
As well as a number of emerging clients too. Yep, yep,
Yeah,
absolutely.
that's a great mix to have because you learn a lot from the young people and you're able to give advice to the older people, the guys in the suits, right?
Yes.
Um, so uh, so tell me a bit about I guess value creation in the work that you do. If I might say, I don't know, say for the sake of argument, say Novartis comes to you and says, I have some ideas, we're working on a project, and you know, what happens at that point in time?
Sure. So I mean, across Blue Matter, there's a number of ways, that we create value. Also, specifically, kind of for the practice that I'm working in, which is that, R&D, slash clinical domain. And so, I think the main way that we create value is just bringing structure, judgment, and experience to these kind of decision points or inflection points that matter for the development of an asset or for a therapeutic area or for a portfolio. Because if you make those decisions, say in a wrong manner or an incorrect manner, I mean, and you're going to lose value. And so that can look like several different things, but specifically, it can look like, doing integrated asset development planning, where you kind of bring the clinical perspectives and you bring the commercial perspectives together so that you have the right frame as you head into, pivotal trials, or, you're developing, the life cycle of that asset in a way that gets you what you need to maximize its value, right? Which in turn then maximizes, your value as a company. And so really that's at the end of the day where I spend a lot of my time creating value.
So are you more of like a horizontal AI person, or is there a particular therapeutic area that's a sweet spot for you?
Truly horizontal. We work across so many different therapeutic areas. I would say in the recent, like several years, the majority of the focus has been on oncology, cell therapy and gene therapy, and also rare diseases. That's typically where I have spent most of like my time, and I think the company has spent most of their time collectively as well. But I think that's just because of the nature of the field in terms of,
Yeah.
right, where AI can add most value is in some of these niche areas in particular.
Yeah, and of course, oncology, I think, is about 80% of clinical trials anyhow. So it's
Yep.
kind of natural that you would fall into that Pareto distribution, right?
Yep.
Uh, um, so so I'm going to skip the value capture question because I think, basically people pay for your services, but I'm far more interested in your moat. It's kind of a VC question, which might seem weird when you're talking to when we're talking to about consulting to AI transformation in biopharma, but it's actually maybe not so because you're probably competing. My guess is you're competing with internal expertise and with other companies, maybe some of the big five or big three or whatever they're called these days. So what's the moat?
So I really bring it back to like the how and why I personally joined Blue Matter. So historically, we have been known and built up our reputation serving clients in launch, commercialization, market access. That's really the core of the business. But when we brought in leaders, like myself, who have that R&D experience, it's basically molecule to market. And that's really the core value prop. But and how we back that up is, over I think 3/4 or more of our team has advanced scientific credentials. So typically looks like at a minimum, master's, but mostly PhD students or folks with PhDs, right? PhD awardees. And so when you kind of bring that level of experience to solve, scientific problems across the continuum, it does create a moat. And that's sort of not just me saying that, but like 90% of our work is, repeat business basically, because we're bringing the right skill set. We're bringing the right approach and methodology. People like to work with us, therefore people will, have us continue to support them over time. And I think it's, really that ability to, to go deep, to think analytically, right, to ask the right questions, and but to use that all of that experience increasingly now as the whole world is kind of like becoming AI-ified.
Oh yeah, right,
You
right,
know?
yeah, yeah, and I like this because there's so much stuff on social media about AI, and a lot of it is like probably I don't know. I haven't actually done any kind of like what's the word an analysis of the text around this, but my sense is that a lot of this is about personal productivity applications and workflow applications. Taking traditional workflows like in legal offices, law firms, and then doing that. There's a incredible amount of attention to that. I think, after that, I think there's a lot of talk and a lot of work being done in AI and drug discovery. But I spoke to a friend yesterday, and he said that he thought that small molecules were like not important anymore. And I said, I don't know. Let's look at the numbers. 60% of the market is still $1 trillion market. People like small molecules because it's easier for patients to deal with.
Yep.
So I guess maybe small molecules are not going away, but there's I think, a lot of really deep expertise in these things. And it sounds to me like your mode is being able to take particular scientific areas and marry them to the commercial path. And that's something I think which the more projects you do, the better you get at. Is that not true?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the collaboration in terms of, internally that we've been able to do and the results that we've been able to generate for our clients, through that, through that thinking, but also just, breaking through the silos. And I think, part of why I think consulting will continue to endure is just the way that work gets done. The fact that, we can sort of break through silos and challenge people because that's our job. Our job is to get to the right answer and to get to the right answer, with accountability and speed, but make those recommendations that are going to make a difference to a company. And that human way of building consensus, overcoming resistance,
Yeah.
will endure. And so that if we can position ourselves to work faster, work more efficiently, by leveraging AI, internally as well as with our clients, but that human element of the work doesn't change essentially. Yeah.
For sure it doesn't. And actually, there was work done about 15 years ago on cataloging modes. It's called the Seven Superpowers, and I've written about this. And so one of them is called size matters. So the more you do, the more you can do, and the more you do, the more you can do, the more you do. So it's kind of like a flywheel.
Hmm.
Another one is trust. So when you build trust, a good one is diamond companies. When you deal with Cartier, you trust Cartier for the diamonds you buy, from the jewelry you buy from them. Even though maybe the technology in somewhere else in the world, in India, maybe it's just as good, but you buy a diamond, you buy your ring from Cartier because you trust them, right? So what is it? Is it trust or is it scale? I mean, with you guys, I mean, what's more important? What do you think people come back to?
People come back to trust.
Yeah.
I definitely believe that. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, that's my sense. How many people are on your team, by the way?
So I mean, globally, right, we have over 400 people
Oh,
in
wow.
several offices, around the world. Yeah, so we're, quite sizable, right? Quite mighty for the results that we deliver. Yeah.
So size does matter, actually. So you do have, so that's part of your moat, the size as well, for
Yeah,
sure.
I mean it helps, right, with sort of, with capability build out, with the ability to serve particularly the big companies globally. That is important and we can do that. And we get sort of advantages from that global thinking, global perspectives, particularly around, market access and things that, we're having that in-market experience really does make a difference. We definitely bring that as well.
So
Yeah.
is this more of a corporate gig, or is it more of a local initiative? I know, for example, we did some work in the past with GSK, and then we were talking with Roche about what we were doing, and it turns out that Roche is extremely centralistic. Everything gets bumped up, backed up to the top to Basel, whereas GSK was much more decentralized in terms of decision making, at least at the time. This was like, 15 years ago. So is it local initiatives or is it like more corporate initiatives?
So we work, I mean, we are structured in a way where we have, sort of global oversight, but we each have our empowered teams by region. And so I think that model works quite nicely, because we're able to reflect the nuances of the markets that we're in and the markets that we serve. But yet we have overall corporate governance that structures where we go as a firm. And I think that's a nice way to work because we have, like, we're very client centric. I mean, part of that is because of our size. We can be very agile, we can be very client centric, but yet we've got the strategic direction, where we know as a firm where we're going so that, things don't get sort of disjointed. So I really like that operating model.
One of the things we talked about for a second or two before we started the podcast, and this came up in a previous show I did this morning with a Rehovot-based company called Evogene, and I've seen it with another Israeli company called Prot AI. And of course, then there's Daphne Kohler's company, which is that tech bio companies, in other words, tech people, are now moving up the value chain to to develop their own molecules and develop their own pipeline. And Evogene is in preclinical now with several. They have a pipeline. They're in preclinical. They're moving into the clinic soon with one of their assets.
Mhm.
Not so long ago, just less than 2 years ago, they were a platform company, and now they kind of figured out that they have a platform. Why not use it and make more money and maximize? And plus, they can control the whole process, right? the integrate. So what's your take on this? In other words, is this a trend? What are companies doing? How are pharma slash biotech companies dealing with this when they're seeing like uh, computational slash AI companies start stealing their turf? How does that work? How is that
Yeah, I
working
mean
out?
it's
I'd love to hear what you think.
it's definitely a dynamic that's playing out for sure. I mean, we see that with, many sort of US companies as well. So I think like there's a couple things in the market that are happening right now. So first you see large pharma making alliances to build the capabilities that they don't have time to build themselves. And so you see a lot of deals, right? Big deals, the Anthropics of the worlds, right? The Open AIs, the Nvidias. And you kind of see a lot of deals in this space with companies like that. Because they get the time, they get the benefit of not having to build it internally. In some cases, I think it also makes sense just to do alliances because everybody has things they're good at, and then you kind of bring them together, and then you have now two companies who are good at things working together, each doing the things that they're very good at, which should, in theory, yield a better result than if you take the time to build something internally that you're not very strong in. You could argue that, but that's what I see in the market, right now. Now, on the flip side of it, right, the companies that are started out to be platform companies realize that they could, in theory, do things that, say, small to mid-sized biotech can do. And absolutely, we see that move upstream and, in value for sure. I think we're about to be at another inflection point around this because, like, there's not yet been, right, an asset as of today, right, July 7th, 2026, an asset that has been, AI generated, and yet available for human consumption, but we're getting pretty close, right? There's several in, phase 3 trials, and there
Yeah.
could be, soon one on the market. So, um, and I mean that you also kind of see what I like to refer to as the pipeline of data, which means like you do see many, many more assets entering the clinic now, in the early phases that are coming from, I'm going to call them the tech bios,
Right.
companies that are not innately biopharma, but are tech, but are moving into the space. So, this is kind of what I thought, would happen, when I joined Watson Health, right, in like 2016. So, it's finally happening. So it's very, very cool to see this all coming to fruition and see how it will all play out. But yeah, I mean,
It's
yeah,
very cool. I mean, people have been
yes,
talking about tech bio for 7 or 8 years now, and now it's beginning to happen. Prot AI, this Israeli company is in the clinic now with one of their assets. And I think there will be more and more. I think that we'll see more and more of that. As you said, we haven't, as of July 7th, we haven't seen anyone who's actually been cleared by FDA yet, but it's going to happen.
yep.
So this sort of brings us to the last question, the surprise question, which is, what's the biggest anti-pattern in your industry?
So I think the biggest anti-pattern is, just thinking about this for a second, is, well, okay, I do think it has to relate to AI because it's just the topic of so much work today, right? The boardroom on down. But so I think the biggest anti-pattern is that, the jobs are not going to disappear. And I think there's been a lot of talk around this recently. And, I mean, I myself, I mean, I joke about this, but, several of us were reading articles on homesteading. I mean, thinking, okay, how are we going to survive? What are we going to do? And, you kind of go through this cycle, right? Um, and I think that at least what I have seen in speaking with leaders who are, actively implementing, AI at scale in pharma is that they're like, it's kind of what I said before. In other words, how the work gets done. I mean, the work at the end of the day gets done in companies by forming alliances, having an opinion, getting people around and endorsing your point of view, making change, driving work forward, confronting people who don't have the same opinion and coming to the right conclusion. That, at the end of the day, is a very, very human thing. And the way that we work as humans together to move whatever it is we do forward. We react to challenges, we ingest information, we move forward. And so I don't think that that fundamental nature of work will change. We may have agents and being a data source, right? And being part of who we oversee and what we oversee and how we do work, but we still work together as humans. I don't fundamentally think that will change in the near future.
Well, we're at the end of the podcast and the end of our time, but I just can't resist and ask you a final question: Is will we see a vertically integrated tech bio company that does everything? In other words, it's like I think it's this LA company, LA Apparel. They're vertically integrated, so they make their t-shirts and sweatshirts and everything in the same building in East LA. And they just save all of the cost and time for sending stuff to I don't know, to Honduras for cutting, and then sending stuff back to Singapore for sewing. They do everything in one place. That's vertical integration. So, do you
Mhm.
think that we'll see vertical integration where a tech bio company will discover the small molecule, have their own tech stack for clinical trials, where a lot of all the crappy stuff that's happening in clinical and clinops gets done by agents, and there's no reason it shouldn't be done, and all of the old vintage 50s stuff that people are still doing in clinops just gets thrown out. Okay. And then basically we'll have a single my thought, right? This is like a crazy thought, is that we may see a vertically integrated tech bio company that does everything from drug discovery to submission to FDA. And they do it all in one system of their own. And they don't need a CRO. It'll be the death of CROs for these companies. They won't need CROs.
Yes. I mean, the CRO industry for sure will face significant disruption. I think the biggest challenge to being truly vertically integrated if you're a tech bio company is when you get to like CMC, manufacturing, all of that. That just that's what I think about in terms of the ability to really scale that out, right? To finance that. And does that make sense? Or should you look at, partnerships for that part of it, while you grow the company? And then if the asset is ultimately successful, because the other things you could do in-house, really, it's just the CMC and manufacturing that I think about as something that remains ripe for partnership. But most other things, yeah. Yeah, I do think we'll
Well,
see it.
I think we'll see integrated manufacturing also. I'll tell you why I think so,
Yeah.
because I had a
Yeah,
guest on the show several months ago, a French company called Ictos. Do you know Ictos?
I don't.
So Ictos does, and this blew me away. When I saw it on the website when I was preparing for the show, I thought it was science fiction.
Yeah.
They combine drug discovery with a robotic lab that does the wet work.
Okay.
So they have a single system that does drug discovery, and they have like a robotic chemical lab that can do 100 formulations at a time. And I said, how much can a human chemist do? He said one or two. So I
Yeah.
said, like, how much faster are you? Well, he said, we're not 100 times or 50 times faster. We're only like about 20 times faster. You understand what we're saying here?
Sure.
This is like, this was 6 months ago. So 6 months ago, Ictos was 20 times faster than a human wet lab for creating the molecules and trying them out. So if that's here to where they're today, that's what Ictos is doing today, then I don't know. I think
Yeah.
it'll be like, LA apparel for life science. That's what I think.
Right. 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 Wow.
Is it
Wow.
going to happen? What do you think?
I could see it. I mean, I do. I mean, certainly, right. The capabilities are just going to get better and better, and speed will improve. I will it happen tomorrow? Probably
No, no,
not.
no, not
You know,
tomorrow. Not
but will
tomorrow.
it happen, in the coming years? Absolutely. I think, could look at that.
Well, we're at the end of our time, and you've been an amazing guest. And thank you for being my guest here on the show. It's talking to someone who's actually doing this stuff. My name is Danny Lieberman. I'm the host of Life Sciences Today. I've had the pleasure to host Tara Austraat-Churik, who runs the AI consulting at Blue. How do you say the
Blue
company?
matter. Blue matter.
Blue Matter. Okay.
Yep.
As opposed to gray matter. Okay. So
Yeah.
Blue Matter. And we'll finish here. And thank you again. And stay with me for another 30 seconds after we stop.